right. So we're spending today. We're going to move through the paramis, right? Week by week now, one week at a time. And today is our generosity. Generosity, yeah. It's such a core quality to be cultivated, all the way through the Buddhist tradition. The Buddha's really big on that one. Generosity, compassion, the generosity underlying it all. Generosity in one way or another. Generosity. And neuroscience can occasionally offer something that's kind of obvious, would be kind of, oh yeah, of course. But then when you read it, it's like it's a support to this whole notion of generosity. We know that generosity feels good to the giver, right? It shouldn't be a best kept secret. For some people, it appears to be a best kept secret, like it's a discovery that it actually feels good to be generous. Well, they did a number of studies and found out that when someone is about to donate money, the neurons fire in the brain, associated with well-being, associated with happiness, associated with satisfaction. Neurons fire in the brain prior to the actual donation. And I was thinking about this with regard to speech. Generous speech. I don't often think of, we work with speech in a lot of ways, but generous speech. What is generous speech? And it made me reflect a bit. I'll give you a couple of examples. What I consider to be generous speech. I had a big flash on my family of origin. It's been one of the jewels in my family of origin, which over time I have come to appreciate more and more, and just in terms how rare this jewel is. It was kind of what I grew up with. There were a lot of, it's not the only thing, but there was, what a jewel this was. And it started with my grandmother. This was like one of the reasons why when I see my grandmother's face or bring that to mind, I'm filled with gratitude. She was such a kind woman. But she always used to say, now this wasn't one of those old sayings. Maybe you've heard this old saying, back then. But if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. No? Hang on, we can look at that in a number of different ways. Like, well, yeah, that's of course, that's a good idea. Well, my grandmother internalized that so much that she lived with us for 11 years. She lived with us for 11 years. This is not like the grandmother just coming over and playing with the grandkids. She lived with us for 11 years. Never once did I hear her say something not nice. Never once did I hear her say something negative about anyone or about anything. Never once did I hear her complain. Including when she was dying from a terrible cancer. Well, I appreciated that, but it was the water I swam in. I didn't realize how unique it was, except that my father, who was my grandmother's son, also internalized that from her. And he lived out the same thing. I can't believe it still. He died when I was 19. I never heard him say a negative thing. He was a quiet man. Now, this doesn't mean, look, there can be different forms of quiet too, right? Stoic, anger underneath the surface, blah, 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 blah. No. There was a spirit of kindness there. And I worked at he owned a machine shop. It was a working class machine shop. He was the owner of it. And I worked there for a couple of years, and I saw him at work. He never spoke unkindly. He never raised his voice. He never raised his voice. And my sister, they're third generation now. She's often here. She might even be here this morning. Melanie, are you out there?
She
If you ever
is.
see it, you see a Melanie out there, that's my sister.
She's there.
She's right there. Raise your hand, wave that hand, sister. My sister inherited this as well, and I've known her my whole life, and she refuses to say something negative about anyone or anything. It's the most stunning thing. And her son, a fourth generation, my nephew, has internalized that, and I can't get him to say a negative thing about anyone or anything. And he's got three sons, and that's the fifth generation. And I don't know them well enough yet, but we'll see. We'll see about that. We'll see about that. Now, what I want to say to you is, in full disclosure, I don't share that part of the lineage. You know, I've been surrounded by it my whole life in my family. And for me, that's still a work in progress. You know, I get grumbly sometimes. I get, yeah. You know, and then seriously, and then we do this thing late at night, which you hear about, you know, gratitude practice, which is basically, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. We both do that, right? But actually, what I've been reflecting on, it's been over. What am I going to talk about with generosity this morning? Like, that is generous speech. Not speaking negatively is a generous act in and of itself, right? Yeah. What we don't say sometimes when that negativity bias is rolling through our minds, and sometimes, you know, the thing about a negative comment, okay, in and of itself, sure, but it tends to lead to a cascade. You know, it tends to release a certain kind of dynamic. I have one thing to complain about, and that reminds me of something else, and that reminds me of some other way that somebody isn't doing the thing the way I wish they should, and it can become like a whole little mini rant, you know. And so a commitment, a bit more of a commitment. I'll just encourage you to practice it from time to time. To actually try to go a whole day without saying something that isn't nice or neutral. I mean, of course, there's a lot of neutral stuff that's in this space, but actually not speaking something negative as an act of generosity. As an act of generosity. Yeah. And sometimes what we don't say is generous. Sometimes when I practice it at all, it's a good kind of restraint. I'll say this to Susan sometimes. She'll go, "You're about to say something." I go, "Yeah, I'm going to keep that in the about to file." Yeah. Because it's going to be slightly negative, nothing, but it actually feels good. It actually feels good. The neurons of satisfaction are firing in the brain because it feels good to not say something that wouldn't be the nicest thing to say. It's actually a satisfying kind of mini renunciation, to simply be aware of what was about to come out of my mouth, to go, I'm just not going to say that one. And in making that decision, it also cuts the chain of negative thought in my own mind. Yeah, I'm interrupting that one. I'm not bringing that into speech. And therefore, the next one doesn't come to mind either. It sets my whole mind in a slightly different, more positive frame. That's been my experience with it. So it becomes itself a mini act of generosity. It's a mini act of generosity because it's also not going to start that little cascade of unwholesome chemicals rushing through my bloodstream. It doesn't take long to start to get into that mood, right? It's just one of those moments of pause, right at the beginning, a mindful pause about what we're about to put out there, about to put pause and choice. Do I want to say it? You know, is it useful? All the usual things. Is it useful? Is it timely? Is it kind? Is it relevant? Is it positive? Yeah. Is it positive? And sometimes the restraint there, the mini restraint, is a mini act of generosity for self and the other, for self and the other. So, as usual, we always try to, offer some kind of concrete little bit. I would just encourage you to play with that a little bit, see how that is for you. Yeah. So thank you. Let's practice together. Let's practice together. And so, to your degree and in your way, in generous attention to the body, generous attention to the body. And when you're ready, lightly closing the eyes. So this morning, the intention as I close my eyes is to bring a spirit of generosity to my practice this morning. That is to say, um, welcoming of whatever shows up, bringing kindness to it, being inclusive, being as non-judgmental as possible with what's arising, being spacious. And invite those qualities in here this morning into the internal holding environment of my meditation. Yeah. I'm beginning as usual with opening the breath a bit more. And orienting toward a comfortable breath. Softening and making room for whatever is arising in your experience. Kindness. Generosity. In the last few minutes of the meditation, settling back a bit more. Receiving. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm going to stop the recording.